Welcome to Slash Forward. In this video, we're going to try not to lose sight of our goals as we evaluate your chance of coming out on top of the scenarios presented in Saw 3. Be sure to hit that like button if you welcome escalating brutality in your daily life. To start, I'll unpack the storyline to see what we can learn. Let's get to it. We open back with Officer Matthews, chained to a pipe with nothing but an empty gun, a flashlight, and his feelings. He finds a hacksaw nearby and reads the room, which is giving him a little hint. However, despite his motivation to live, he can't bring himself to do it. Instead, the tank lid is again put to good use, as he punishes his foot for acting like a little bitch. This allows him to slide the shackle over what was once his ankle. We then find a tactical team plasma cutting their way into a room, and the scene prompts them to call in resident jigsaw expert Carrie. She's initially scared that they found Eric's beautiful corpse, and is relieved to find it's just your standard grunge rocker, who is held in the center of the room by chains. The recording reveals he was born into privilege but has chosen to squander his life as a repeat criminal, so he's subtly being offered the chance to break free of the chains that bind him. With only a minute 30 before the shrapnel bomb goes off, he chooses the Band-Aid method. This ultimately proves to be more time-consuming due to the necessary scream time between each ring, ultimately resulting in his failure. Carrie, haunted by Eric's disappearance, is glad to put this behind her. When they get back to policing, it's noted how unusual the scene is. John Kramer was in terrible shape when they left him last, and he would be unlikely to weld the door shut, precluding the possibility of escape. Carrie tries to wash away her troubles but is assaulted by a ghostly apparition. As she reviews the evidence, she slowly comes to the realization that she's being watched. Taking no chances at all, she fires several rounds into her closet, killing her neighbor, but then discovers this was just some sort of unusual unmanned video capture device. But she still gets abducted. She wakes up sometime later in an intricate gothic nightmare. As it turns out, she's just too damn good at solving mysteries of the dead because she is similarly dead on the inside. So her affirmation test involves a ribcage splitter with a key submerged in acid and a 1-minute timer. She fiddles around a bit and then goes for it, hopefully not with her dominant hand. She gets the key and undoes the padlock, but finds herself still surgically connected to the device. Her kidnapper then walks in for a brief moment of recognition, and then it's time for the big show. We then swoop in on a couple in trouble. They find themselves adrift, unable to connect. And as Lynn prepares to dip out for her shift at the hospital, Chris hits her with that real stuff.
What is it you want from me, Chris?
A divorce.
At the hospital, things are falling apart while she deals with her personal problems. She's convinced to step out and provide a hand, and quickly saves a child's life before dropping the mic on her way back out. Back in the locker room, she begins to lose touch, and I don't know, just seems like she may not be fully appreciating her life anymore, so she gets snatched up. We then learn it's grocery day at the old Jigsaw workshop, where Lynn is getting fitted for a special trap. She's wheeled in to meet John Kramer, who was very impressed with her Yelp reviews and is looking for a second opinion on his condition. It is unfortunately not looking good. Unfortunate for her, because her game will be to keep John alive to prevent a shotgun caller from blasting her in the face. They have another test subject elsewhere in the building who's going to be going through some trials, and John would like to stay alive to bear witness to the fruits of his labor. At that moment, we meet up with Jeff, who's waking up inside his box. He has a tape that goads him about wallowing in hatred after a drunk driver killed his son. His tests will bring him closer to the man responsible, and forgiveness will be key in finding salvation. As he knocks over his shipping crate, we take a brief flashback to establish how on the edge Jeff is, as he does his best Bobby De Niro, and then takes a break from that to berate his daughter for having the audacity to disturb one of her brother's toys. Like he's using it. Back in the present, Jeff wanders down a hall until he finds his first test, opening the door. He grabs a nearby plank and proceeds cautiously. Amanda observes this from their ancient surveillance system and then lets her spiritual father know that it has begun. She's then compelled to get up in Lynn's ass about her insistence that John be hospitalized. Around here, they like to work with what they've got. John gets her calmed down, reminding her of the rules, but then goes into shock. Lynn enlists Amanda's help and eventually gets him stabilized. And I think they may be becoming besties. It's official now. Surgery is on the horizon and it has to happen here. Jeff eventually finds a likely door which leads to a walk-in freezer that contains a nude woman strung up. He finds a tape player that identifies Danica here as the lone witness to his son's death, but she ran after it happened, which put a hindrance on the overall application of justice. He'll have to dig deep to find forgiveness and reach among the pipes to retrieve the key as she gets sprayed down with water. He takes a little time to grow as a character, which is detrimental to Danica's health. When her pleading for compassion finally cuts through, he stretches as hard as he can to get the key, losing a bit of his face skin in the process. And it takes a bit too long, helping him learn that he has to be a little more prompt with his puzzle solving. A great lesson for next time. Back at the workshop, Lynn takes a moment to snoop around, but Amanda is always watching. She's cool about it, demonstrating that due to the conditions of the collar, she has total control over the situation. So it's better to focus their efforts on the impending home brain surgery. But first, a brief flashback as Amanda gets nostalgic about the old days, showing us that there's real art here to the delicate preparations. After she escaped, John came to visit her to have a conversation about fear. With this on her mind, it begins to seem like Amanda may be too emotional for this line of work. Then John tells her about a packet of instructions he has for her in his desk in the event he doesn't make it through. After that, we roll back to Jeff, making his way down a more friendly hallway. At the end, he's given a brief reminder of his trauma to gear him up for his next challenge. When he opens the door, we finally get a trap initiated by tripwire. Oh, feels like coming home. He hears a man stuck in a container of some type begging for help, but this time he goes straight for the tape before making any decisions at all. But it's on a platform that results in awkward eye contact. Turns out this is Judge Halden, who gave his son's killer a 6-month sentence. The key to release him is inside his son's possessions, which will have to be incinerated to release the key. If he chooses not to, Halden will be drowned slowly in rancid pig slurry. Again, Jeff finds some quantity of satisfaction in the suffering, a real detriment to his success. He faces down some internal struggles, but chooses personal growth. He saves the judge, who only ended up swallowing approximately 1 quart of hog juice. Exciting, but Lynn is focused on her preparations. Before you know it, she's in there, cutting away that skull to relieve the unbearable pressure. Utilizing some simple home tools, she first makes his skull resemble a wiffle ball, before removing several layers with the precision of a Warhammer enthusiast. With a fresh vent, John gets the sensation that he is skydiving nude. And in a way, he is, as he starts to flatline into oblivion. Amid his hallucinations, he makes an unexpected proclamation that immediately sets Amanda to falling off the wagon. As she does, she again flashes back to better times, their first big challenge. Everyone gets put into place and John sedates himself. They get everything all cozy and set up and then kill the lights. The ladies then meet back up once things are more cleaned up and settled, and Amanda unsettles things. But Big John comes to and calls her off. As John laments her emotional nature, we go back again to see that she was so weak, she had to return to the scene to end Adam's suffering in a terribly painful way. Meanwhile, Jeff and Halden have found the next door. Jeff is gifted a bullet and tries to get his mind right, but the judge can't shut up about the harms of vengeance. Jeff kicks her open, setting off another tripwire. Presented to Jeff, the driver of the car, who is crucified on the rack, an elaborate torture device designed to twist his body up like a pretzel. To get the key, all Jeff has to do is take a shotgun blast. As he again weighs his options, the rack starts doing rack things. Halden checks the glass, finding it to be shatterproof, and confirms a hair trigger. So he switches to trying to snap Jeff out of it as Tim develops a couple of nasty, open spiral compound fractures to the forearms. Halden begs him to do something, appealing to anything that may motivate Jeff to take action. Once the legs start going, he finally begins. He actually removes the key masterfully, but Halden can't hear about it because of his ear. Unfortunately, Jeff is unable to figure out the contraption or find the lock in time, offering only some mild comfort in Tim's final moments as his head gets twisted completely around. Back in the surgery room, John asks Lynn about her husband. She acknowledges they've been drifting somewhat, but now she'd really love to see him again. John casts aspersions about infidelity, and we learn a little bit more about his psychology.
I don't condone murder, and I despise murderers.
Okay, John. Through her insistence that she's experienced incalculable suffering, he questions why she focuses on this rather than on spending time with her daughter and husband. Amanda then reads her packet of information and pops back in to let John know that Jeff is done with his test. But he's not out yet, so she defies his instructions to let Lynn go. She begins to have some survivor's jealousy and attempts to make moral decisions outside the game, which, per flashback, she is prone to do. We see that Amanda had returned to Matthews, possibly to put him down like Adam, but he had already escaped. He ends up going to town on her with a pipe, but his little foot flap proves to be a hindrance. Regardless, he still manages to brutalize her pretty thoroughly, until she manages to jam him up again. John uses this as an example of how he has to constantly clean up her messes, because she's not fully formed yet. But she doesn't buy that and longs to feel the satisfaction that he gets from the games, and he tries to reassure her this is all part of a bigger plan. He begs her to heed his instructions due to the mutual importance of the plan for both of them. Meanwhile, Jeff makes his way out of the maze of terrors, acquiring the firearm that matches his bullet, and he emerges into the workshop right as they reach a tension crescendo. Amanda goes her own way, shooting Lynn in the back, causing Jeff to fire a round off into Amanda's neck. John then reveals that Lynn is Jeff's wife, and by working outside the confines of the game, Amanda has managed to ruin 4 lives with one action. We then find out
I want to play a game.
Lynn and Jeff's saga were nested tests inside of the larger test for Amanda. Again, she proved herself too eager to kill and inflict suffering, developing games that don't teach lessons or offer a means towards salvation. Through this final test, she's shown herself unworthy of succeeding John as Jigsaw, and so she bleeds out on the floor. He then turns his attention to Jeff, encouraging him to think back on his evening and really try to learn something meaningful. He has the choice to exact his vengeance or find forgiveness in his heart.
I forgive you.
And he chooses both. A truly enlightened gentleman. Luckily, his method of murder results in a slow death, because it gives John the chance to produce his "in case Jeff kills me" tape. It reveals that Jeff's daughter is trapped in a room somewhere with limited oxygen. So as Lynn's head explodes and the movie ends, Jeff's epic adventure is just beginning. I'll be honest, that ending has me excited about the next movie, which I don't think I've ever seen. But for now, let's examine the ins and outs of the scenarios provided to get a feel for how we could make our way through. Now, there's an obvious criticism here about how some of the traps precluded the chance for success. This has been the case before, but it is somewhat forgivable here since they wrote it into the screenplay. We'll have to chalk it up to Amanda's inexperience and, quite frankly, what is the confusing and convoluted nature of John Kramer's moral philosophy. She's already here because she personally craves acceptance and leadership. If you layer everything else on top of that, it's just a recipe for misplaced motivations. So her first presentation was the chain trap. This one must have been remotely controlled because the timer was so short and there wasn't a tripwire to be found anywhere. Obviously, it was designed to result in death. Although once the bomb went off, it was only a matter of time before the authorities cut their way in. If you could free yourself and survive the blast, you would likely survive until help came. But is that possible? Initially, I thought it foolish to rip the rings through the skin, assuming that they had likely been clamped on in some way. This seems to be indicated as a possibility when an officer holds one up and an obvious gap is visible. However, based on the door and other contraptions, Amanda is clearly a talented welder. Perhaps she had him out long enough to actually weld in solid rings. At any rate, both options are pretty bad, because running a rough metal ring through your skin is a pretty terrible sensation. If you could get them off, you would find yourself in an uncleared area, and while the victim was basically torn apart by the explosive, it appears to be a shrapnel bomb. The real danger here is the debris entering your body, not the blast itself. It's possible you could find a closet or take cover behind a counter and survive, but that's assuming you could remove the rings, which I'm going to say is an impossibility. Even if you could detach the rings without ripping the skin, it would be slow going and the timer is real tight. But assuming that you can't remove them without ripping, there are 2 major problems. The first is that your boy is over here plunking these things out like they're nipple rings, but they're not. They have achieved full thickness penetration of the skin. Certain areas of the body would require a tremendous amount of force to work them free, which would be incredibly hard to do. Even if you could, the final issue here is that the last ring appears to have been run around his jawbone. If this is a solid ring, there is no way in hell you're gonna pull that thing out. It's just not gonna happen. Moving on to the ribcage spreader, this is another one that was set up for retribution rather than rehabilitation. It's a lot more simple than the chains, so we won't take too long discussing it. Basically, you're presented with a mild challenge to unlock yourself. However, unlocking doesn't remove the fact that the device is still surgically implanted. So if unlocking doesn't turn it off and just strand you there, it's gonna end up going off regardless. Your best bet is to first get it unlocked. You have to go into this assuming your persecutor is acting in good faith. I do wonder if the container could have been tilted just enough to drain out some of that acid to make it a bit easier. But that's really a secondary problem. Again, there is a very limited time to act here, but once you get the lock undone, the only possible method I could see to get out of this is to first fight the urge to try pulling on the splines. They're not coming directly out. You'd have to try leaning to and fro to see if you could unseat them from beneath your ribcage, first on one side, then the other. The first side would be the hardest, but then you'd be more free for the other half. This would again require you to slowly scrape metal through a hole in your skin, but you may actually live. The next would be Lynn's shotgun collar. This entire contraption seems a bit janky, and I'd be really hesitant to mess with it. We know it locks on, but we don't really see what kind of locking contraption it is. Also, it's on the back, and Lynn is being watched most of the time. They establish fairly clearly that the tools and devices in the workshop would be of little help to her if she's acting alone, so it's unlikely there's a combination of actions available that would have resulted in her release. She also knows up front that her test is secondary to what else they have going on. In her situation, it seems the best chance for success would be to just do your job and wait. This is essentially what she did, and at the end, he did give the command to release her. Finally, from here, we move on to Jeff's series of purity tests. Honestly, I watched through trying to make note of various objects available nearby that may be useful, and that he could bring in with him, but that is mostly unnecessary. Jeff's tests, by the standards of the series so far, are almost trivially easy. In his case, it's more about personal struggles. The keys are easily reachable and they require some sacrifice from him, but not a lot. It's all about moving past his hatred, but if he can't save the witness, it's not clear how he's gonna save anyone else. All he had to do to get Danica's key was literally reach for it. It's a true failing of his character that he was unable to pull this off. I mean, what I've gathered from the plot points they revealed was that his son was hit by a drunk driver, witnessed by one person, and that the culprit was arrested on scene and given a relatively light sentence by the judge. It's not clear to me what the witness testimony would have done here. She can't attest to Tim's intoxication, and she's not responsible for sentencing. If Jeff holds her responsible for that due to her lack of testimony, then what is he holding against the judge? The judge made a decision absent vital witness testimony. I don't think that's the case, but it doesn't make sense to hold them both equally responsible. It really gives the impression that Jeff spent a lot of time angry, but not much time on thoughtful introspection. This reveals one possible avenue out of this scenario, which is to proactively engage in mindfulness meditation in your daily life in case just such a scenario arises. These factors are basically equal with the judge and Tim. I know it hurts, but who among us could listen to someone die slowly rather than burning a few toys? I get nostalgia, but your son is not those toys. In fairness to Jeff, this was his one successful trap. Finally, the rack. So Tim was the focus of Jeff's vengeful thoughts for a long time. But honestly, this device is so brutal, I don't see how you could allow it to twist up even a little bit without trying to stop it. Interestingly, despite his double failure here, he did manage to delicately remove the key. Unfortunately, it tripped the trigger on the release, which would have been unexpected. Simple safety precautions could have saved the judge. You should always consider what's downfield from your firearm. Incidentally, this is also the one trap where utilizing a tool could make it easier, safer, and quicker. Jeff passed a clothing rack at one point that had various articles of clothing on it along with some wire hangers. Just bend the hanger to lengthen it and hook it toward the bottom or side. Then use the hook it already has to snag the key. You can intentionally fire the gun, allowing you to jerk the key around as much as you want. I'm not totally sure what happened after that, if it was just too late or if the contraption was too complex to figure out how to use the key to stop it. So maybe there would be other complications to consider, but that's why you want to be determined and steadfast in the beginning. Do the thing you know how to do first in order to maximize the amount of time you have to figure the other things out. Also, you should have up to 2 other brains there to help you work through it. If you didn't previously, allow them to die or spread their cranial contents all over the floor. Amanda's situation may warrant a brief comment here. Her game wasn't really trap reliant, and its outcome was highly unpredictable. However, I said in the last episode you have to play the game to win it. To her credit, she didn't even know a game was afoot. And why would it be? She's already proved herself worthy of life multiple times. Maybe she's not Jigsaw material, but come on. So with all that said, it seems that the odds of coming out ahead on this one are pretty good, so long as Amanda wasn't the one in charge of your body. I think the audience is supposed to find Jeff's commitment to his rage surprising and unfortunate. This would imply that the standard expectation is that most of us have a reasonable capacity for empathy and compassion. With that being the case, his tribulations, despite the fact that they were case-specific, would have been fairly easy to navigate for most normal people. Since you are obviously exceptional, I believe you would fare well above the standard expectations. Before we go, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. As an FYI, I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks uncensored movie reviews of Life Force and Under the Skin, with others to be added over time. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.